divine abidings, or what we sometimes call the Four Quarters chant. So you might want to open that up and join in, or just listen to these words. It's basically a reflection on how we can shift our attitude. One of our habits can be, not necessarily everyone has this habit, but unless we've really learned, we have this habit of thinking that the particular attitude I have right now is somehow who I am. So of course, this is my attitude. I'm grumpy today because I'm grumpy, right? There's this real personal identification with our mood. And one of the things that we learn in our practice is our mood, like everything in life, keeps changing. And we might have been grumpy this morning, and then there's a few moments of feeling pretty sweet and open, and then anxious, and then it keeps changing. And then we can begin to study how it is that different moods or attitudes come and go, and we can become quite skillful. And one of the ways we want to be skillful is how to gravitate, how to aim this heart in the direction of kindness and compassion and gratitude and balance and equanimity. And it might be that these wholesome attitudes are more available than we might think. So let's go ahead and do this chant. Page 30, I think, in the chant book. Again, suffusion with the divine abidings, or the Four Quarters chant. Now let us make the four boundless qualities shine forth. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with compassion. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with compassion, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with gladness. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with gladness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with equanimity, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with equanimity, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. So we're settling into our meditation time, trusting the body, the sitting body. And without any of us doing anything special, we notice that the heart is already sensitive, the mind is already knowing. So let's notice that natural sensitivity, the ongoing knowing faculty of the heart and mind. And in a sense, we're keeping this knowing faculty in mind. We're keeping the heart's sensitivity in mind. In a very simple sense, life, living, is an exposure. Exposed to the movement of sensation, exposed to the movement of thought and emotion, feeling. So noticing in that simple and direct, immediate sense, exposed to these movements of body and mind, ceaseless movements, and just wondering, is it okay to relax? Is it okay to trust what's moving and being felt? Do I need resistance right now? Do I need to be tight in any way? Do I need to be in control of what's moving, what's happening, what's being known? So part of what our daily formal meditation time is about, we're exploring this hypothesis, you could say, that it's okay to just let everything move. It's really okay to not to imagine I need to be in charge, I need to be in control, but instead maybe, just maybe, I can be open and receptive, allowing everything that's moving to move, and allowing the sensitive heart, the knowing mind, to do what it naturally does. It senses, it feels. Can that be okay? Even if at times the feeling is intense or unpleasant, or really beautiful, beautifully pleasant, maybe it's okay to let everything keep moving, keep changing. And of course, at times, our experience might appear to be static. But with more stability of this present moment awareness and less projection, we'll see that things are always moving. Experience is always in motion, changing, weakening, intensifying, shifting. And just maybe it's okay to let these movements of nature move. Let nature be nature. And as often as it's helpful, remind the body, the heart and mind to relax and to energetically soften, to be more trusting in a way that feels safe. And whenever the mind is confused or seems to be a reaction, a struggle, then in that sense we let the mind step back and again recognize that this experience, whatever it is, and without judgment, this experience is being known, being felt. Because we can get very clear that this is true, that this experience is being known and felt, that it's like this now. The mind is knowing, heart is feeling, it's like this. And to sense that as a kind of refuge and a path to keep this simple way of relating in mind. This is being known. It's an experience being felt, being known. And even if we have a lot of opinions or a lot of reactions, those reactions, any mental construct that the mind thinks, is just the next thing being known and felt. And this is our path to keep this wise way of relating in mind. There is this natural process of something being known, something being felt. It's ongoing. It's always this way. And it can be recognized in that straightforward sense. Oh, this is being known. And it really changes everything. We go from being the doer of our life to, in a sense, the one who knows that this is being known. So do your best to cultivate this way of perceiving and see what it sets in motion for you. And we'll continue now in silence. So again, for these last few minutes of the set, remember we're not trying to make something happen. It's more simple than that. We're trying to recognize what the mind is knowing, or recognize that this is being known. So of course it's a very receptive way of relating. And even if, because of habit, the mind is controlling or is judgmental, then wisdom just recognizes that it's like this now, feels like this now. So what is the particular effort that's required to keep the present moment in mind? Not to change things, but just to keep the present moment in mind. So in this sense, our practice has a lot to do with remembering. We're remembering to recognize what the mind is knowing. And if this activity feels really personal, then we recognize that it feels really personal. So take a moment, adjust the body, stretch a little if you need to. And again, a big welcome, everyone who's here in the room in Minneapolis at the city center, and everybody here online. It's nice that we can gather in this way. And if you didn't see it yet, I did put the Sunday resources there. Has some information, including an article that from one of the first, I guess, overview of Theravada Buddhism, early Buddhism, that was written by Rapula Rahula back, I think, maybe even in the 60s, if not sooner. And I thought it'd be nice as we begin this month to reflect on the path. Those of you who were participating in July, we talked about refuge, and I talked about refuge. We discussed that, and I thought we'd move into, well, what's the path? What do we do? What did the Buddha encourage us to do on this path of awakening? What is the Buddha's path of awakening? So I want to talk about that this morning. Just to begin, and the way we often begin in early Buddhism is just honest assessment of our predicament. And I thought I'd start with a little statement from one of my teachers, Sayadaw U Tejaniya, this Burmese monk and wonderful meditation teacher. And he writes or spoke, "We need to thoroughly understand how much the three unskillful root qualities of mind are torturing and tormenting us." That's a sobering and honest, to observe our life, our mind carefully enough to be able to say, excuse me, to ourselves, these habits of my mind are problematic. The habit of lust or greed, wanting what I don't have, not wanting what I do have, aversion, and delusion. These different habits of denial and distractedness. And delusion is also described as thinking that I know, because then I'm not open, I'm not curious, because I think I know. So as we just observe what it is to be a sensitive creature living a life, we begin to sense how oppressive the habit energies of our mind are. And we begin over time to be able to categorize them as habit energies that have to do with greediness, habit energies that have to do with aversiveness, hatred, fear, anxiety, right? All under that category of aversion. And habits that have to do with delusion, not seeing clearly, not being interested would be under the category of delusion, thinking that I know, thinking that it's okay to be disconnected or distracted, like what's the big deal? That also is an aspect of delusion. And these habits, not only, we see them out in the world, but they're out there in the world, like our culture, whatever, is characterized by greed, hatred, and delusion, or greed, aversion, and delusion. But it's only, that kind of cultural or worldwide characteristic, of course, is there because of each of our individual habits, right? The world isn't greedy independent of our collective hearts. The world is the way it is because of the way cumulatively or altogether we are relating, showing up. That's what makes the world the way it is. And so Sayadaw says, we haven't learned this lesson fully yet, how much our mind and our world are dominated by greediness, aversiveness, and delusion. We haven't learned this lesson fully yet. We don't learn our lesson the first time, the second time, or the third time. We only turn for help from wholesome qualities when we realize the unskillful qualities are running our lives and we no longer can stand it. Right? Then we're interested. Oh yeah, this isn't helping me or anybody. This is not who I want to be or how I want to be. It doesn't feel good for my mind to be dominated with these habits. And these habits, it's not personal. It doesn't actually make sense to hate ourselves for these habits, to be greedy, to be aversive, to be deluded. These habits arise because of causes and conditions. It's not personal. And it can seem strange to say it this way. It's not personal, but we are responsible, because to just let my greedy habits express themselves or my aversive habits express themselves, well, there's consequences to that, right? They just keep getting reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. So what's a person to do? And what the Buddha says is, we're being asked, and this is what I talked about in July. You can go back to the YouTube channel if you want to listen to any of those talks, if you didn't catch them. But we're cultivating this, we're taking refuge really in this Buddha and Dhamma, being awake. Buddha, that's what Buddha means. We're being awake, Dhamma, to the way it is, to the conditions, to the underlying nature that's here and now. And interestingly, we get a sense of our predicament when we realize how, in an ongoing way, our mind is not interested in the way it is. And we've replaced that kind of spiritual interest, that real curiosity, with a sense of certainty. I know the way it is. So why do I have to be interested? And the example I often give, many of you have heard this, I think it's worth repeating, even for those of us who've been practicing for a long time. I'm in my 41st year now of practice, sitting every day, or almost every day at least, over these 4 decades. And still, it's good for me to remember like how easy it is through a day, through a part of a day, to not be interested in the mind. And what do we mean by mind? You know, this capacity of being sensitive, this capacity of knowing, like that for periods of time my mind can be oblivious to, when clearly it's the most relevant thing about being human is that there is this sensitivity, this knowing, and yet we don't pay attention, we're not interested in the nature of the mind, you could say, the nature of the knowing mind, the sensitive heart. And if you're feeling right now like, yeah, well, big deal, I know that. But it's one thing to know intellectually that the mind knows that the heart is sensitive. And it's a whole nother thing to learn how to be awake to this nature of the mind, let's call it, and then to be awake, to continue to keep it in mind with some continuity. Because it's sort of a powerful, even existential choice. I can either be the doer of my life, where I'm giving a talk, and I'm checking in, like, are you looking at the people online? Are you listening? Am I off? Is it a useful talk? Looking for feedback. I could be doing the business of my life and really imagining that I'm doing it, my life. Or even while I'm doing the same thing, the same stuff is happening, I could learn to have more and more interest in the experience that's here and now, that this is being known. Mark giving a talk on Sunday morning is being known. And we think, well, no, the talk will end if I'm aware that it's like this now. Or how can I drive my car if I'm aware that driving is like this now? Well, that's why it's a training. We can definitely learn how to be awake to the way it is. We can prioritize that wakefulness to the way that it is, that receptive knowing, without getting in the way of the activity of life, including giving a Dharma talk on Sunday morning at Common Ground Meditation Center, or doing whatever you do in your lives. We just think, no, I'm the doer. I need these special circumstances. So we do. We create this thing we call kindergarten, or daily meditation time, where we don't have a lot of demands as the doer. Just sit still in a relaxed way. That's the demand. And then we learn in that more simple environment of our daily sitting time to keep this underlying nature of the mind, the knowing mind, to be aware, well, yeah, this experience is being known, and being known, and being known, and being known, with some continuity. And we'll see, like especially as you get a little better at that the mind will still think about stuff and plan and worry and act out in the way that our mind is, has tendencies to express itself, the thinking mind, the emotional mind, right? It still does what it does, but now there's this new thing online, which is, oh, it's like this now. This is being known. So we see the mind, the worrying mind worrying, and then there's this non-judgment, almost like a mirror, like, oh yeah, this is being known. And the Buddha asks us to persist at this. Interestingly, the last thing the Buddha said before he died, he used this word appamada, which usually gets translated as vigilance or persistence or being wholehearted. Practice wholeheartedly with vigilance. Don't give up. And he's basically saying, hey, there's a way, being this wise presence, this capacity we all have to be aware of what the mind is knowing, what the mind is doing. Like a mirror can reflect, the mind can reflect back to itself. This is being known. It's like this now, all day long. And you want to be really persistent at keeping that in mind. And in a way, the way to think about that is, it's what allows for transformation or change or learning. Because when there's this reflective, when we've developed this mental muscle to be reflectively aware of what the mind is doing, what the mind is knowing, then it opens up the possibility of seeing how the mind, what the mind is doing, that is not skillful, setting emotion, stress, and problems for myself and others. And when the mind is relating, showing up in a skillful way, and setting emotion, healing and releasing and ease and well-being. And to know the difference between ways of relating, what the mind can be doing that's not skillful, what the mind can be doing that is skillful. Deep into the bones, we eventually learn, oh yeah, this is not the way the mind, what the mind is doing right now, how the mind is relating right now, because there's awareness of it. I really know this isn't helping. This is setting emotion stress. This should be abandoned. Doesn't mean we can abandon that habit of mind, but at least the wisdom awareness knows, oh yeah, the mind is acting out in an unskillful way. It's digging these unwholesome grooves deeper. It's not helping anybody. But it's really good to know that, right? If the mind is acting out, it's really good to know it. We might think it's better to be oblivious when we're acting out because it's so painful to realize it. But it's that unpleasant feeling of seeing the mind, the heart being unskillful, that actually sets in motion the transformation. It isn't really right to say that I've stopped myself from being bad. I've stopped myself from over worrying or over planning, or for being so judgmental, or for being so grumpy, or for being so, and you fill in the blank, whatever your tendency of your personality might be. It's not really right to imagine that I stopped doing that. If you did stop an unhelpful, unskillful pattern, the way that happens is there are a lot of moments where that wisdom awareness knows, oh, it's like this, with some continuity. So it's connecting the dots. It's really seeing that it's not helpful. Oh, that addictive pattern of eating more food than my body needs right now. Or that addictive pattern of thinking I need every neat thing I see somebody else having. Oh, I want that. Oh, that's a cool car. I want a car like that. Oh, you have a cabin? I want a cabin. You've got that cool sweater. I want a sweater like that. I want a new iPhone. I want a, and on and on. So then we observe that, and we observe like the tracking of that experience. We observe the crunch, the contraction that goes with greed, or the contraction that goes with aversion, or even the contraction that goes with delusion, like being distracted, caught up, disconnected, actually also comes with tension. And we see that because there's that reflective mindful awareness doing what that reflective mindful awareness does. It illuminates cause and effect. The conditional lawful unfolding, cause and effect. Oh, this is why the heart, mind, and body is so tight so much of the time, because the mind is relating like this, right? We start connecting the dots. Oh yeah, when I'm relating as if when I get this, I'll be happy, then I get tight because I don't have it yet. So I should be tight because I can't be released until I get what I want, right? And it all starts to make sense how this body, mind, heart is so burdened and how it can become unburdened. That's how we begin to understand the path. But it really relies on this persistence. We have to first know what the Buddha, what our teachers mean by this wisdom awareness, this mindful awareness, this present moment awareness, this reflective knowing. And we have to learn, we have to build the capacity to persist, to have some continuity. And then it makes sense why we got to set aside some time, because without kindergarten, we're not going to build the confidence and the capacity to be living our day, each minute, more and more at least, with more of that present moment awareness. It can, with practice, become the predominant habit of the mind. Initially, it's tiresome because initially it seems, it's not actually true, but it will initially seem like I have to be mindful. And now I got to be mindful again. And now again. And it's so stupid. Why? It's like, because what we'd really like is like a moment of being mindful and then I'm done. It's Sharon Salzberg has this great line. She calls it the practice, the torment of continuity, right? It's like from an egoic point of view, having to be present for the rest of my life feels like an undoable amount of work. But we have to move in that direction because the practice initially does feel very personal. Just like we imagine that being distracted is personal, it isn't. It's nature, the mind wanders. And being mindful isn't personal either, ultimately. But initially, that personal effort, that personal valuing of being present, that personal getting myself to the meditation chair, the meditation cushion, or Calm Ground Meditation Center, or the next Buddhist retreat or whatever, it feels as personal as anything feels personal. But we're building this capacity, this natural and impersonal capacity, just like so many of our habit energies don't feel that personal, but they got set in motion often in a personal way. And then they became habit, and then they just became the character, the personality, right? And now we can't stop them. We may not like a lot of our personality attributes, but try to just say, well, I'm in charge here because it's my personality, so stop. Does that work? No, because it's not personal. If our personality was actually personal, it certainly wouldn't be this personality. I don't know about you, but this is not the personality I would have chosen. If I personally went through the buffet line when you got all your personality attributes, this is not what I would have put together. But it is the way that it is And it doesn't make sense for me to imagine that I'm not responsible. Initially, it makes sense for me to personally take responsibility for what is actually not personal. And I personally learn, how does this get set in motion and how does this get transformed? And so we study, use the mind to study the mind. We cultivate this present moment awareness and we observe. Basically, the dots we're connecting are, how is the mind relating right now? So it's not just what the mind is knowing, oh, it's hearing a sound, or it's feeling the body sitting, or it's feeling the breath coming in, or it's noticing that the mind is planning. But it's also, how is the mind relating to what the mind is knowing? Is it relating in an irritated way, in a greedy way, in a scattered way, in a clear way, in an aversive way, in a kind way? How is the mind relating? What's the mind knowing? And we can also know how the mind is relating. And they're not really different. They're like two facets of the present moment. What's being known and the filters or the way of relating that the mind is knowing through, the filter, you could say. And we're observing what way of relating sets in motion tension and suffering, and what ways of relating, what ways of knowing set in motion release. And we're really getting clear about that because we care. Nobody will make us do this. Nobody can make us do this. We will only do this if we connect the doing of this practice in a initially very personal way. This is how I take care of myself. Because I do care about this life, this is what I can do. I can get to know the mind, and by getting to know the mind, I can get to know which ways this mind relates that are skillful and what ways this mind relates that are unskillful. And I take this up as hard as it may be, because this is the way to take care of this life. Ultimately, this is the most important way. We still got to wash the dishes and do our laundry and take care of our relationships and figure out a way to pay the bills and feed ourselves. But you can do all those functional things to survive and still be very, 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 very unhappy. Right? So surviving is not the same as peace, release, ease, happiness, freedom. And there are a lot of people who live a long life who are very unhappy. Right? So mostly we get that survival can't be the only thing. Right? So if we're privileged enough not to be on the edge of survival, fortunate enough not to be currently starving or without shelter, or just doing well enough that we can be interested in this, you could call it a more spiritual, important spiritual question. What is the way? What is the path toward real happiness? The happiness of release. The happiness of the heart that is unburdened by life, unburdened by relationship, unburdened by having a body, unburdened by birth and death, mortality, unburdened by whatever might burden our heart. I'm interested in being unburdened to the nth degree. And that, in a sense, is what a human being can do, at least, when it has the privilege of not being on the edge of survival. Otherwise, when we are on the edge, now we can think we're on the edge a lot of the time when we're not actually on the edge. We can be obsessed about dying when we're not actually dying, or health when our health is good enough, or financial ruin when we actually are getting by well enough. So we don't want like this necessity of taking care of survival. It just has to be good enough, because otherwise, we'll see people who are really at the 1% in terms of affluence and resources at their disposal, and what are they doing? They're obsessing about survival. More money, more security for the money I do have, a bigger gate in front of the house. Well, what happens if the 12 cars I have don't start? I'll get a 13th, right? I noticed that. I was shelving some books in the teacher library in our office, and there are a few books, the important books, that we have more than one copy of, in case one of those important books gets checked out and somebody needs, right? And it's just like, well, how many of those important books, how many copies of the Buddha's middle length discourses do we need? It's endless. How many slacks do we need? How many this, how many that? So we have to be fearless, like, okay, I do have some space in my life to put aside getting more security and more safety, and I can do this sort of foundational work of interest in the nature of the mind and the nature of suffering and its release. And that's what the Buddha means by the path. He's not, there's a lot of people who can tell us how to take care of the body, how to take care, finding a job, a suitable livelihood, how to feed the body in an appropriate way, how to keep the body healthy, all these sort of things, how to have good relationships in our lives. But the Buddha is saying that even when you're doing all those things with a lot of competence, all the survival things, good social relationships, good health, good this and that, you're not going to be completely satisfied, because whatever that security is, it's temperamental, it's uncertain, it's going to go away. Your health, your social relationships, your possessions, nobody keeps anything. And we know that whether we're conscious of it or not, on some level, we know that the elements of survival are tenuous and go away. If you don't know that, remember that. That's what in the last month, we were chanting the 5 remembrances. I'm of the nature to grow old. I have not gone beyond aging. I am the nature to be sickened. I have not gone beyond sickness. I'm of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond death. All that is mine. Everything that I own, all my possessions, everything that's beloved to me will become otherwise, will become separated from me. I am the owner of my intentional actions. Every intentional action I do leaves an impression. I am the air, right? So that's the last reflection on karma. This is all that I have, or this mind stream, these impressions that have been laid down by the way I've been relating. Every time I relate to an experience, not the experience, but the way that I'm knowing it, relating to it, that leaves an impression. So if I'm relating with greed, that tendency to be greedy gets laid down more deeply. If I'm relating with kindness, that way of relating gets laid down. So the heart that's knowing and relating and responding, that's a living thing, right? It's a natural process that is being created in each moment of relating. When I relate intentionally, I see Cam and I relate to him, I interact with him, or I ignore him. But whatever way I relate, that leaves an impression in my heart. That's the last reflection. So we ground in this, and makes us interested in really studying the mind all day long. And so this is I'll talk this month about the path, but the first part of the path, and there's a lot more that we can talk about and reflect on, and you can read the article that's in the chat. And for those of you in the room, I think Robin is putting these resources on the blog. So just go to the website, and one of the main links on the homepage is the blog, and you'll see the link to the article. And I'll put more articles as the month goes on. But the first thing is just to generate this persistence, this wholeheartedness. Oh yeah, being aware that this mind is knowing, that this mind is relating right now. That's relevant, how the mind is relating, what the mind is knowing, and how the mind is relating. And remember, this is not a cognitive thing that we don't figure out intellectually, that the mind is knowing and how the mind is relating. It's an observational thing. Like, just to get it clear for us, just check right now, what is that effort that's needed right now to be aware that the mind is knowing and what the mind is knowing? And how the mood is, how is the mind relating to this experience? Is it clear? Like a clear mirror? Or is it distorted? Does the way that the mind is relating right now, does it have an agenda? Does it have a point of view, like, I'm an idiot and I better get my act together, or my life will be a failure. I'm never going to be able to do it. Other people can do this practice, but not me, right? There may be that sort of background attitude. Everything I start, I don't finish. Or I'm too old to be doing this. I should have started when I was in my 20s. Mark started when he was in his 20s. But now it's too late. So then we notice that attitude. And what do we probably notice about an attitude like that? Oh, that's not a helpful attitude. Right? That attitude is a cause for getting tight. Oh, good to know. That attitude isn't helpful. And then we might beat ourselves up because we have an unhelpful attitude. Okay, beating myself up is like this. This is what's being known. Oh, that's not helpful either. Hating myself for being judgmental or whatever. Because the mirror doesn't do anything but reflect back. Now it's like this. Now it's like this. And this is what allows the mind to learn. And when you get some really beautiful momentum, then you'll have an opposite problem. You'll feel like, oh no, I have to personally do something because I'm practicing. And then eventually wisdom and awareness will go, oh, that idea that I have to be the Buddhist practitioner is a cause for stress, right? Because when there's some momentum, when the awareness, that present moment awareness is just there, doing what present moment awareness does, we don't need that personal sense of me wanting to be present. It's clunky and unnecessary and stressful. But initially you may need that, like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to do this thing. I don't really quite get it yet, but it makes a lot of sense to me that if I'm going to be a human being, I might as well be present. If I'm going to have a life, it doesn't really make sense not to be aware. What's the point? Right? To have a human life and to unconsciously gravitate towards unawareness. I mean, when you say it out loud, you really get like, oh yeah, that's crazy. It doesn't make sense. If we're going to have a human life, what makes sense is to be vividly present in this ongoing way, to be intimate, to be really feeling what we're feeling. And in particular, recognizing that how the mind is relating matters. This is really the point of karma, which is a concept that's often misunderstood. What the Buddhist teachings on karma mean is the way the mind is relating right now matters. It doesn't matter because the Buddha says it matters. It matters because when we watch, when we observe how the mind is relating, we can directly sense the impression that's being left in the mind stream, in the heart. Nobody has to tell us, oh, that was unskillful, Mark. Because all we have to do is observe. When I relate in this way, this is the ongoing reverberation. Oh, that's a heavy load. Or when I relate in this skillful way, there is the absence, no trace. The heart is very light and unburdened. Oh, that's why we call it skillful, because there's no trace. That's why we call it unskillful, because the heart is left with a trace. It's burdened. There's a heavy impression left. So in that sense, the kind of moral, or the result, the karmic fruit, is known here and now. It's not like Santa Claus is keeping track or God is keeping track. It's happening right here in the body, heart, mind, this experience. It's right here. Like in some later schools of Buddhism, they had to figure out, like, where's the storehouse of all those karmic impressions? Philosophers, and got to like map it all out. But it's here and now, the latent, all the underlying tendencies, that's what we sense here now. So when something happens in this moment, like I see an attractive person, or I have a disturbing thought of something I did that was so humiliating, or I remember a skillful action, it reverberates all the latent tendencies that are related to whatever experience I'm having. That's how we know that the storehouse of karmic impressions can only be one place, because there is only one place, here and now. This is the only place to store stuff. There is no other place. No future. Is there a future somewhere? No, there's just this. Is there a past? We might deludedly think there's something behind us, but the past is gone. The future isn't here. As we say in early Buddhism, now is the knowing. This is what we have. So you might think, or we might think appropriately, that this heart has a lot of unresolved pain, a lot of unresolved trauma even, or unfinished business. It's probably true. All of that is probably true. But it's important to understand it's here and now, because that evokes that interest, doesn't it? Well, maybe I should be interested. And can I learn to be aware from this place of innocence? Let me just track. Let me learn all over again, cause and effect. Instead of presuming I know, let me put more and more energy in being aware, being awake, and less the idea that I have to do, I have to fix, I have to choose. The doing, the choosing, the fixing, that's going to happen anyway. Because we learn our life, all of this, it's already happening on its own. We go through life anyway on autopilot so much of the time. To think all of a sudden that I got to do my life when we're so at ease being on autopilot so much of the day anyway, is kind of funny. So we can just trust the awareness and let life choices, let Mark be Mark. And like I said, we'll keep coming back to this in the weeks ahead. But for now, I need to finish up. And just before I pass it on to Shannon for the small groups, I'll just mention a few announcements. Most of you know this already, but Common Ground Meditation Center, we operate on this principle of dana, which is the Pali word for generosity, which means since we began 30 years ago, almost now, we haven't charged for any of the programs. Everything is to be received as a free gift. So please reflect on that and really take it as a free gift. No strings attached. It happens because of people's generosity, of course. And when you feel inspired in any way to get involved at the center, then just find your way to give back, whether it's supporting the livelihood of the teachers who teach or the paid staff that work at the center or the buildings. So contributing in a way that makes sense, that makes you happy, volunteering, sending your loving good wishes to all the people involved at the center. All this is what makes this place happen, and has happened this way, like I said, for these 3 decades. So if you have more questions, just check out the website or contact the center. Robin or Gail in the office will respond to any inquiries, any questions you might have, or you could check in with Shelley or me after any of the programs too. So there's a special workshop this coming Saturday, the 13th of August. We've invited Femi Akinanabe from Los Angeles to come back. He's a longtime community member, former teacher here. Femi's finishing up his residency, so it's actually Dr. Femi Akinanabe, and in Los Angeles. And we're going to be doing this workshop, Shelley, Femi, and I, on awakening and healing. So we're looking at the different healing modalities, therapeutic healing modalities, and the Dharma modalities, the awakening modalities, and how are they same, these Western psychological therapeutic systems, and how are they different from the Buddhist teachings and practices? How do they overlap? So we thought that might be an interesting topic. 9:30 to 4, everyone's welcome to come online, or if you're in town, you can come in person. And then I'll be doing a day-long retreat the following Saturday, the 20th. There's still room for the online version of the Labor Day retreat. It's 8 days, the Sunday before Labor Day weekend, and then ends on Labor Day. I forget the exact dates. And then Shelley and I are planning to organize re-inhabiting the building party for those of you close to Minneapolis. And that's going to be Saturday afternoon, the 10th of September. We'll have some music, food, but mostly a chance to be on the land, in the building, connecting with people, actual people, not virtual people. So maybe we'll have a live stream, but we're encouraging anybody close enough to get here, if the weather's good, to come to the building, hang out, have some conversation, hear some good music from some of our community members who are musicians. So keep that in mind, the 10th of September, 5 p.m., so late afternoon. So Shannon, I assume you'll be here. The small group conversation can just be about persistence, like how to keep present moment awareness in mind, and why is that so slippery, or anything that seems relevant in your practice. Those of you in the room who want to stay, please stay. Those of you online, please stay. In about 2 minutes, Shannon will organize you into groups of 3 or 4 for these community conversations. They last about 15 minutes, and Shannon will bring you all back, and I'll bring you all back here in the building. Have a good week, everyone. Hope to see some of you next Sunday.